Good morning, students. Let's start our new chapter, Separation of Substances. What is the name of this new chapter? Separation of Substances. Topics to be covered in this chapter are methods of separation, hand picking, crushing, winnowing, sieving, sedimentation, descendation and filtration, evaporation, use of more than one method of separation, that is condensation.
There are many instances when we notice a substance being separated from a mixture of materials.
We see that before we use a substance, we need to separate harmful or non-useful substances that may be mixed with it. Sometimes we separate even useful components if we need to use them separately. For example, tea leaves are separated from the liquid with a strainer while preparing tea, and grain is separated from stalks while harvesting, and milk or curd is churned to separate the butter. So different materials have different types of separation. We want to discuss this. Let's start one by one. Substances to be separated may be particles of different sizes or materials. This may be solids, liquids, or even gases. So how do we separate substances mixed together if they have so many different properties? We will discuss some simple methods of separating substances that are mixed together. So, methods of separation. First, we will discuss which method we are applying for the separation of solid from other solids. Methods for the separation of solid from other solids. Which are the methods to separate solid from other solids? Threshing is the hand picking, winnowing, then sieving. These are the methods of separating solids from other solids. So first method is hand picking. What is hand picking? From the name itself you can understand it. That is the process by which undesirable components are just picked up by hand. What is hand picking? The process by which undesirable components are just picked up by hand. This method of hand picking can be used for separating slightly large sized impurities like the piece of dirt, stone, and husk from wheat, rice, or pulses. And the quantity of such impurities is usually not very large. In such situations, we find the hand picking is a convenient method of separating substances. Next method is threshing. What is threshing? Yes, the process of separating grain from husk or chaff is called threshing. The process of separating grain from husk or chaff is called threshing. One may pluck mangoes or guavas from the trees, but grain seeds are much smaller than mangoes or guavas. So plucking them from the stalks would be impossible. So the process that is used to separate grain from stalk is threshing. In this process, the stalks are beaten to free the grain seeds. Sometimes threshing is done with the help of bullocks. Machines are also used to thresh large quantities of grain. Next method of separation of solids from other solids is winnowing. What is winnowing? We want to discuss that. The process of separation of heavier and lighter components of a mixture by wind or blowing air is winnowing. What is winnowing? The process of separation of heavier and lighter components of a mixture by wind or blowing air. This method is commonly used by farmers to separate lighter husk particles from heavier seeds of grain. The husk particles are carried away by the wind. The seeds of grain get separated and form a heap near the platform for winnowing. The separated husk is used for many purposes such as fodder for cattle. Next method is sieving. Where we are applying this sieving method? Yes, sometimes we may wish to prepare a dish with flour. We need to remove impurities and bran that may be present in it. What do? We use a sieve and pour the flour into it, as shown in this picture. Sieving allows the fine flow particles to pass through the holes of the sieve, while the bigger impurities remain on the sieve. This is what we call as sieving. What is sieving? The process by which separate solid constants of a mixture which differ in the sizes. You may have noticed sieves being used at construction sites to separate pebbles and stones from sand. Next, we will discuss how can we separate insoluble solids from liquids. Separation of insoluble solids from liquids. Sometimes it may not be possible to separate components of a mixture by winnowing and handpicking. For example, there may be lighter impurities like dust or soil particles in rice or pulses. How are such impurities separated from rice or pulses before cooking? What are the methods we are applying in our home? Yes, rice or pulses are usually washed before cooking. When you add water to this, the impurities like dust and soil particles get separated. These impurities go into water, which becomes a little muddy. Now, what will sink to the bottom of the vessel? Rice or dust? Yes, rice will sink and dust will float. Why? Have you seen that the vessel is tilted to pour out the dirty water? When the heavier component in a mixture settles after water is added to it, the process is called sedimentation. What is sedimentation? When the heavier component in a mixture settles after water is added to it, the process is called sedimentation. When the water along with the dust is removed, the process is called descendation. What is called descendation? When the water along with the dust is removed, the process is called descendation. The same principle is used for separating a mixture of two liquids that do not mix with each other. For example, oil and water from the mixture can be separated by this process. If a mixture of such liquids is allowed to stand for some time, they form two separate layers. The component that forms the top layer can then be separated by descendation. Let's again consider a mixture of solid and liquid. For example, after preparing tea, what do you do to remove the tea leaves? Will you try descendation? It helps a little, but do you still have few leaves in your tea? Now pour the tea through a strainer. Did all the tea leaves remains in the strainer? Yes. And this process is called filtration. What is filtration? Which method of separating tea leaves from prepared tea is better? Is it descendation or filtration? Yes, filtration is better. So, what is filtration? In this process, the impurities are passed through a filter. The filter has pores in it that allows only liquid to pass through it, can separate the solid particles. So, what are the things we discussed today? Let's recollect. Yes, first we discuss the method of separation, for that is separation of solid from other solids. What are the methods we are applying to separate solid from other solids? To separate solid from other solids, the methods are threshing, winnowing, hand picking, and sieving. Next, we discuss separation of insoluble solids from liquids. That is separation of insoluble solids from liquids, that is sedimentation, descendation, and filtration. So these are the things we discussed today. Study this.
Let's continue the remaining portion of this chapter in our next class. Thank you.